I have been king of Vale Marin for 30 years, and in all that time I never once wept, until a morning I could not explain, when I woke with salt on my face, and a name I had never heard breaking apart in my mouth. I did not know the name. That was the terror of it. I lay in the gray light with the river running loud beyond the walls, and my chest ached the way a healed break aches before rain, an old wound I had no memory of taking. My wolf paced the inside of my ribs, restless, mourning something. I asked him what. He had no words, only that grief, low and certain, as if we had buried someone and forgotten the grave. I rose. I told myself it was a dream. A king does not build his day on dreams. But the ache did not leave me. I stood at the window of my chamber and looked down on the river valley that was my whole inheritance. The pale stone halls of Vale Marin stacked along the water, the spring floods running high and gray between their banks, the floodgates at the northern wall standing open to let the swollen river through. It was a sight I had woken to 10,000 times. That morning it frightened me, and I could not have told you why. My eyes kept going to the floodgates. My wolf whined each time they did. By the time I came down to the long hall, the ache had sharpened into something almost like hunger, a pull, faint and northward, toward the servants' court where the pack wards took their morning bread. I had no reason to go there. I went anyway. I told my steward I was inspecting the stores, and he believed me, because kings are permitted their strangeness, and mine had been few enough over 30 years that I was owed one. That was when I first saw her. She was standing at the well with an empty pail, and she was not doing anything a woman does not do 100 times a day, and still the whole morning bent toward her the way water bends toward the low place in a field. Dark hair bound plain, a ward's gray dress, mended at the cuff, a stillness in her that did not match her station, not the stillness of the meek, but of someone who has already survived the worst thing and is simply waiting to see it come around again. She looked up. Her eyes found mine across the court, and something crossed her face that I have spent the rest of my life trying to name. Not fear, not the flutter a ward gives her king, something older, recognition, and under it, so quick I nearly missed it, a grief that mirrored my own, exact as a key in its lock. My wolf went silent, not still silent, the way a whole forest goes silent when the true predator finally walks in. And into that silence a single thought dropped, clear and unbidden, and not in my voice. You came. This time you came to me. I did not know what it meant. I would spend days not knowing. She looked away first. She drew her water and walked back toward the low houses, unhurried, and I stood there like a boy while my steward asked me twice whether the grain count satisfied me. I do not think I answered him. I was watching the way she walked, the straight back, the unhurried step, a woman going about a small chore as if she had all the time in the world and had already spent one lifetime learning that hurry buys you nothing. "Who is that woman?" I asked at last. "Which, my king?" "The ward at the well." He squinted after her. "Us old, I think, kitchen ward, came to us as a child, orphan, no people to speak of, quiet, keeps to her work." He hesitated, then lowered his voice with the apologetic air of a man passing on gossip he knows a king shouldn't want. "There's been some talk, sire. The chamberlain's wife has missed a brooch, silver, an heirloom worth a season's wages. They're saying a ward's hand took it. Nothing proven. The chamberlain wants it looked into before the flood turning." Something moved through me then, a cold, premonitory dread, wildly out of proportion to a missing brooch. My wolf surged up snarling, as if the words were a blade already falling toward a throat I loved. I mastered it barely. When I spoke, my voice came out low and hard enough that the steward took a step back. "Bring me any such matter before it is judged," I said. "Do you understand me? Before, not after. Not once the chamberlain has decided, before it comes near a court." He blinked. It's only a servant's quarrel, sire. A brooch. Such things are settled by the chamberlain, not the crown." "Before," I said, and the whole hall went quiet, and he bowed and did not argue. I did not understand my own vehemence. I only knew that the thought of that woman standing accused made the old grief in my chest tear straight open, and that I would sooner have burned the brooch and the chamberlain's wife with it than let it happen. I went back up to my chamber and I stood at the window and I looked at the open floodgates for a long time, and my wolf would not settle, and I could not have said what either of us was afraid of. I will tell you now what I did not learn until much later in her own quiet voice, on a night when she finally trusted me with it. I said it here so you understand what walked into my kingdom that spring, wearing a ward's gray dress and carrying an empty pail. Without it, nothing I did makes sense, least of all to me, who did it. She had lived this day before. She had lived all of it before this spring, this court, this king who did not yet know her. In a life that no longer existed, the brooch had gone missing exactly as it was going to go missing now, and the blame had fallen on the quiet kitchen ward with no people to defend her. She had done everything a wronged soul is told to do. She had wept, because she was innocent, and the innocent believe tears are a kind of evidence. She had sworn her innocence on everything holy. She had gone to the chamberlain and knelt and pleaded, and he had looked through her the way you look through a servant. And at the very last, when they dragged her before the high seat on the day of judgment, she had begged the Alpha King himself, begged me, with her hands out and her voice breaking, and I had looked at her with a stranger's cold eyes and let them cast her out. Because it was easier, because a ward is only a ward and a chamberlain's wife is owed her satisfaction, and the accounts wanted balancing before the flood turning, and I had not yet felt the thing in my chest that would one day wake me weeping. I did not even remember her face an hour after. That is the part she could never make me forgive in myself, though she forgave it. Not the cruelty, but the ease. The way a man can end a life and think of dinner. They put her out past the river gates with the spring floods rising. She had nowhere to go and no one to go to. She walked north along the swollen water into the cold, and she carried, though she did not yet know it, 2 small lives that were mine. Twins. The heirs my line had waited 4 generations to bear, conceived on a single night I had also been too proud to remember rightly, a night I had told myself meant nothing because a king does not owe a ward his memory. She died in the exile I ordered. She died of cold and hunger somewhere in the northern reaches, curled against a stone with her arms around a belly just beginning to round, whispering to children who would never draw breath. And the last thing she felt, she told me, was not even hatred. She had wanted it to be hatred at the end. Hatred would have been warm. But what she felt instead was the unbearable smallness of having begged and not been heard. Of having spent her last dignity on people who were never going to give her anything for it. And then she woke. She woke in her own narrow cot in the ward's house with the gray light coming in and the river running loud, on the morning before the brooch went missing. Whole. Alive. Her hands unmarked by the cold that had killed them, her body her own again, the small lives not yet begun. And she understood with a certainty that left no room for doubt or hope or self-deception, that she had been given the one thing the wronged almost never receive in this world or any other, the road back. The same board, the same pieces, the same players, and her, this time, knowing every move before it came. She told me she lay there a long time in the gray light. She told me she did not weep. She had done all her weeping in a life that no longer counted, and it had bought her exactly nothing, and she was done spending herself on things that bought nothing. So she lay still and she made herself a vow, cold and clear as the spring water running past the walls. I will not beg. Not this time. Not for my name, not for my life, not for any man's love. This time they will come to me, or they will not have me at all. I will take back what is mine with my own 2 hands, and I will not put those hands out to anyone, ever again. She did not yet know that a king 3 halls away had woken that same morning with salt on his face and her name breaking in his mouth. She did not know that the bond she had died never having claimed had reached backward through her death and touched me too. That whatever undying thing had bound us had refused to be ended by so small a thing as an exile and a grave, and had dragged us both back to try again. She thought she was alone with her second life, one woman against a court that had already killed her once. She was not alone, but she had learned in the coldest possible school to move as if she were, and That terrible, hard-won self-possession was the first thing about her that undid me, long before I understood what she was. She did not run. That was what I could not get past in those first days, though I did not yet know its meaning. A ward accused of theft, who by every law of self-preservation should have fled in the night or wept at the chamberlain's door or thrown herself on the mercy of the hall, instead moved through those days with the calm of a woman reading a page she had already read once and found she could bear. The brooch went missing on the second day, as I had somehow dreaded it would. The chamberlain's wife raised her cry, loud and satisfied, the way people cry out when a misfortune arrives that they have been half-hoping for, and Ustled, instead of hiding, walked straight into the center of the storm and began, very quietly, to take it apart. I had her watched. I told myself it was for her protection, that an accused ward might come to harm, and the crown had taken an interest, and so a guard's eyes on her were only prudent. That was a lie, and my wolf knew it, and after a day or two so did I. The truth was that I could not bear to have her out of my sight, and the reports my captain brought me morning and evening were the hours I lived for. I would take the day's business standing at the window, half listening, waiting for the knock that meant word of her. And the word was strange. "She hunts, sire," my captain told me on the third day, and there was a grudging admiration in it that I recognized because I felt it too. The accused ward. She doesn't hide and she doesn't weep. She asks questions. Who last cleaned the chamberlain's chambers and on what day? Which door in that wing sticks in its frame so a body might slip through unheard? Where the understeward's boy was on the night the brooch went missing, and how a boy on a ward's wages came by boots of tooled southern leather. He shook his head. She moves like she already knows the shape of the whole thing and only wants the pieces in her hand to prove it. I've run down thieves for 20 years and I've never seen the like. She did know the shape of it. I understand that now, though I did not then. She had spent a whole ruined life turning this injustice over in the dark of her exile and her dying, and somewhere in all that turning she had finally seen the truth she had been too frightened and too broken to see the first time. The truth that had been sitting in plain sight, while she wept and begged and let herself be led to the gates. The brooch had not been stolen by a ward at all. It had been taken by the understeward, a soft, smiling, careful man named Havard, who kept the household accounts and had been quietly bleeding them for 11 seasons, skimming the grain tallies in the cloth stores and the wine, a little at a time, patient as rot. The flood turning brought the spring reckoning when the accounts were read aloud before the chamberlain, and the sums were made to balance. Havard's sums would not balance. They had not balanced for years, and each spring he had needed some small disorder to hide the large one, a broken lock blamed on weather, a shortfall blamed on spoilage. But this spring the gap had grown too wide for weather and spoilage. This spring he needed a thief, a real, named, punishable thief, whose crime would swallow every discrepancy and close every question, so that no one thought to read the ledgers too closely. A kitchen ward with no people was the safest thief in the kingdom. No family to raise a cry. No patron to demand a proper inquiry. A woman who could be accused, condemned, and cast out inside a week, and forgotten inside a month, and whose disgrace would paper over 11 years of theft so neatly that the real thief could go on smiling and skimming for 11 more. He had chosen her the first time. And now, blind to the fact that she had died of his choosing and come back knowing his name, he had chosen her again, walked the exact same path toward the exact same door, never dreaming that this time the ward at the end of it was waiting for him with her arms crossed and her eyes open. I sent for her on the 4th day. I told myself and my steward that it was to question the accused as was my right. It was not. It was that the pull in my chest had become a kind of steady pain, low and insistent, and I could no longer make myself believe the grain stores needed a king's eyes, and I simply, helplessly wanted to be in a room with her and hear her speak. She came into my private hall without trembling. She bowed, correctly and no more, the exact bow a ward owes a king, and not 1 degree deeper. And then she stood and waited, and looked at me with those still dark eyes as though she were taking my measure against some remembered failure, weighing the man in front of her against a man she had known before and found wanting. "You are accused of theft," I said. "I am," she agreed, not a tremor in it. "You do not deny it." "Would it matter if I did?" She said it without heat, as a plain observation about the way the world was built. "A ward's denial is worth the breath it costs to say it. Less, so I have not spent the breath, I have spent the days instead." She lifted her chin, a small, precise movement. "By the flood turning I will hand you the thief, the real one with the proof in your hand and no room left for doubt. I ask one thing only, that you judge nothing and let no one else judge anything until then." I stared at her. No one spoke to me so plainly, without fear, without the flattery or the flinch that 30 years of kingship had taught me to expect from everyone who wanted something. She spoke as though she and I were two people bound by a contract I had signed and forgotten, and she was reminding me, patiently, of its terms. And the strangest part, the part that frightened me, was that I did not want to punish it. Every instinct a king is supposed to have said this was insolence and should be checked. Every instinct I actually had said the opposite, said lean toward this. The way a man half-frozen leans toward a fire he has stumbled on in the dark. "And if you fail," I asked, "if the flood turning comes and you have no thief but yourself?" "Then you will do what you were always going to do," she said. There was no bitterness in it, which somehow made it land harder than any curse could have. "You will let them put me out, and I will not stop you and I will not beg you." She held my eyes steady as stone. "I have begged a king once. It bought me nothing but the shame of having begged. I will not do it twice for you or any man." Once. The word went through me like a spear driven clean through the ribs. I had never seen this woman before 4 days ago. She had never in her life begged me for anything. I would have remembered a face turned up to mine like that. And yet my wolf lay down at that single word as though it recognized a wound it had dealt with its own teeth. And the grief I had woken with, the grief that had no source, rose up in me so suddenly and so completely that it closed my throat, and I could not speak for a moment. "You speak," I managed at last carefully, "as though we have met before." Something flickered in her face there and gone, quick as a fish under gray water. Grief, and a terrible, weary gentleness, and under both of those the faintest ghost of a forgiveness I had done nothing to earn. "No, my king," she said softly, "we have not met before." A pause and the smallest sad curve of her mouth. "You would not remember it if we had." And she bowed again, the exact and measured bow, and she turned and walked out of my private hall, and I sat there in the sudden emptiness with my hands not quite steady, and no earthly idea why I felt, down in the deepest part of me, that I had just been handed back something precious that I had thrown away with both hands and never even noticed dropping. I could not stay away from her after that, and I stopped pretending to myself that I could. I found reasons, and the reasons were thin, and I did not care. The investigation wanted a king's oversight. She was both accused and accuser now, and such a strange arrangement surely required the crown's attention, did it not? So I walked with her through the household in those days before the flood turning as she worked her quiet hunt, and my captain walked a pace behind us with his hand near his sword and his face a careful blank, and the whole court watched their king trail a kitchen ward through the servants' passages, and did not dare say a word. And as I walked with her, the bond did its patient work on me, and I want to tell you honestly how it came, because it was not the way the songs say. It did not strike like lightning out of a clear sky. It came the way spring water comes into low stone, seeping, patient, finding every crack and hollow, filling me up so gradually that I did not know I was drowning until I was already under and had stopped wanting air. It came as steadiness. A morning would arrive knotted with the ordinary miseries of rule, a border dispute, a failing harvest in the western holds, an envoy who needed managing. And then I would hear her voice in the next room, low and even, asking some sharp small question of a frightened servant, and the whole snarled day would come loose in my hands and lie flat and manageable. It came as attention. I found I knew where she was in any room without looking, the way you know where the one warm thing is in a cold house. It came as fear, a specific, particular fear that I could not reason my way out of. One night I stood at my high window looking north toward the swollen river and the open floodgates, and a horror rose in me so total, so absolute, at the mere thought of her passing through those gates and out into the cold water beyond, that I turned from the window and gave an order that made my captain think, for the first time in 20 years of service, that his king had lost his mind. "The floodgates," I said. "Post a guard, too. The ward ussold is never, do you hear me, never to be put out through them. Not by the chamberlain, not by any court, not by my own written word if it should come to that. If any man tries it, they are to stop him and wake me, whatever the hour." My captain looked at me a long moment. "Sire," he said slowly, "she stands accused of theft. If she's condemned, casting out is the law. You'd have me set a guard against your own law." "I would," I said. And my wolf, who had howled and paced every night since the morning I woke weeping, lay down at last, quiet and easy, as though I had finally undone one small thread of some enormous wrong that neither of us could remember but both of us had done. "Set the guard, Captain. I'll answer for it." He set the guard, and that night, for the first time in a week, the grief in my chest let go enough for me to sleep. She caught me watching her once, in the pale hour before dawn, in the little room off the kitchens where she had spread out the household ledgers by a single candle. She had them open to the grain tallies, and she was following Havard's careful columns down with one finger, and her face in the candlelight was intent and unafraid and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the softness men usually mean by the word. Beautiful the way a blade is, or a true thing. She looked up and found me standing in the doorway, and she read my face the way she read everything, in an instant and to the bottom. And for just a moment her own composure cracked clean across, and I saw what was underneath it, and it was not calm at all. It was longing, naked and unguarded and old, so old, longing worn smooth by years I did not understand, and then it was gone, shuttered, hidden behind the stillness before I could be sure I'd seen it. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Look at me like that." She set the candle straight, a small steadying motion, and her hands were very level, which was how I knew they wanted to shake. I know that look. I gave everything I had to that look once, every scrap of myself. All my begging and all my believing and all my hope poured out at the feet of a man who wore that exact look, and it was not enough because I was the one who wanted, and a woman who wants is a woman who can be refused, and I was refused. Down to the ground I was refused. Her eyes came up to mine, bright and hard and wet all at once. "So I have decided not to want. I will clear my name because my name is mine and I mean to have it back. But you, whatever this is that you feel, whatever it is that has a king standing in a kitchen doorway before dawn watching a ward read ledgers, you will carry it yourself. Every step of it. I will not lift one finger to help you love me. Not this time. I have done that before, and I know exactly what it costs, and I will not pay it again." I did not understand the this time, or the before, or the again. I understood everything else she said, and it opened me up like a struck door. "Then I will carry it," I heard myself say, and my voice was not a king's voice, it was just a man's. "However far I have to, however long it takes. If this thing is mine to carry, ussold, then I will carry it all the way to you, and I will not ask you to walk even one step of the way to meet me. You have my word." She turned back to her ledgers, but not before I saw what my words had done, the way her whole hard-won stillness fractured for a breath over something that looked unbearably like hope. She had forbidden herself on pain of her own heart. "We'll see," she whispered, and she did not look up again. Men say that. And then the court gathers, and the ward stands accused before them all, and we see what a king carries when carrying it costs him something in front of people who matter to him. We have all seen what men carry then. She wet her lips. "Go to bed, my king. The flood turning is in 3 days. You'll want to be there. You always are." I went, but I stood a long while first in the passage outside that little room, listening to the small sounds of her turning the ledger pages, and I made myself a vow of my own to set beside hers, though I did not yet know I was matching a vow she'd made in another life. Whatever it costs me, I thought, in front of whoever it costs me in front of, she will see, this time, what I carry. The 3 days before the flood turning were the longest and the strangest of my reign, and I spent as many hours of them at her side as a king could steal. I told myself I was overseeing the hunt. In truth, I was learning her greedily, the way you learn a language you realize you should have spoken all your life. I learned that she was patient past any patience I had ever seen, that she could sit with a frightened boot boy for an hour, saying almost nothing, until the child's guilt and fear spilled out of him of their own weight. I learned that she was kind in a way that had teeth in it, kind to the wronged and the small, the scullions and the wards and the old half-blind man who tended the hall fires, and unmoved as winter stone before the soft, smiling, powerful men who had done the wronging. I learned that she never raised her voice and never needed to. And I learned the shape of Havard's guilt as she laid it bare, thread by thread, in those 3 days. She found the understeward's boy first, a thin child of perhaps 10, in his fine tooled southern boots, jittering with a fear too large for his small body. She did not frighten him. She sat with him in the warm by the kitchen fire, and she told him gently that she knew he had carried something for the understeward on the night the brooch went missing, and that carrying a thing on a grown man's word was no sin in a child, and that the flood turning was coming, and that a boy who told the truth to the king before the flood turning would be a boy the king remembered kindly, and a boy who lied for a thief would drown with him. She said it all so softly, so without threat, that the child wept and told her everything, that Havard had given him a small wrapped bundle and a copper coin and told him to leave it unseen under the ward Ussold's cot, that he had not known what it was, that he had known from the copper coin and the secrecy that it was wrong. She found the ledgers next, or rather she had already found them, and now she walked me through them column by careful column until even I, who am no clerk, could see the rot, the grain that had come in and the grain that was written down, and the widening gap between the two, spring after spring for 11 years. The wine, the southern cloth, the neat, patient, lying sums, each one small enough to overlook and all of them together a fortune, and the boots she showed me. The fine tooled southern boots on a ward boy's feet, bought with a copper coin's worth of grain skimmed from the mouths of the pack. She found the chamberlain's wife's own maid, who had seen Havard in the chamberlain's wing on the night the brooch went missing, at an hour he had no business there, and who had said nothing because a maid does not accuse an understeward and keep her place. Ussold did not ask her to accuse anyone. She only asked her to be willing, when the flood turning came, to say what she had seen if the king himself should ask it. The maid, who had watched the quiet ward stand accused all week without breaking, said she would. By the eve of the flood turning, Ussold held every thread of it in her steady hands, gathered in 3 days what she had failed to gather in a whole first lifetime, because in that first life she had spent those 3 days weeping and begging and waiting for someone to save her, and in this one she had spent them saving herself. She laid it all out for me one last time in the little room by candlelight, calm and complete, and when she finished she looked at me and said only, "Tomorrow you'll judge. And you'll see whether you're the king I think you might be, or the one she stopped. The one I'm afraid you are. Good night, my king." She would not say more. But that night I did not go straight to my chamber. I went and stood at the northern wall in the cold, and I looked at the floodgates standing open to the roaring gray water, and I looked at the 2 guards I'd posted there against my own law, and I felt the grief in my chest and the fear that would not be reasoned away, and somewhere down beneath both of them I felt something else at last, certainty. Whatever came tomorrow, that woman was not going through those gates. Not while I drew breath. I did not know why it mattered so much that it felt like my own life. I only knew it did. The flood turning came in gray and roaring, the river at its highest, and the whole pack gathered in the great hall as it does every spring. Every soul in Vale Marin packed shoulder to shoulder under the high pale stone vaults, the tall windows throwing down cold light, the swollen river visible far below through the arches, running fast and gray toward the open gates. The accounts would be read. Disputes would be settled. And this year everyone knew a thief would be judged. I sat the high seat. The chamberlain rose and made his case, oily with certainty, and his wife beside him made her accusation with the satisfied grief of a woman getting exactly what she'd come for. The brooch, the heirloom, the season's wages of silver, the ward with no people. The bundle found beneath her very cot here Havard rose, smooth and sorrowful, the picture of an honest steward pained by a servant's crime, and produced the brooch itself, and produced a witness, and named us old thief before the assembled pack. And the hall turned to her the way a wolf pack turns to a throat it has decided to take. I saw it happen, and I felt the other life pressing hard at the edges of this one, felt, in my bones, the ghost memory of a day I had never lived, when she had stood exactly there, in exactly that turning tide of contempt, and had wept and begged and put her hands out to me, and I had let them lead her to the gates. My wolf rose snarling. My hands closed white on the arms of the high seat. And I made myself be still and wait, because she had asked me to judge nothing until she gave me the thief, and I had given her my word, and I would keep it though it took the skin off my hands to hold it. She did not weep. She stepped forward into the center of the great hall, into the cold falling light, and she was not the accused. Every eye in that place expected a cornered ward, and found instead a huntress standing over quarry she had run to ground days ago, and had only been waiting for the whole pack to gather to reveal. The brooch was found beneath my cot, she said, and her clear voice carried up into the pale vaults and out to the farthest wall, so that the whole packed hall went quiet to hear it. Placed there, as it was always going to be placed there, carried in a wrapped bundle by a child of 10, on the copper coin order of the one man in this hall who keeps the accounts, and who needed a thief with a name and a face before those accounts were read aloud today. She turned, unhurried, and looked at Havard, and he was still wearing his sorrowful smile, but it had gone stiff and wrong at the edges, like ice beginning to give. "You have skimmed the grain tallies for 11 seasons," she said to him plainly, as if remarking on the weather. "The wine, the southern cloth, a little each spring, small enough that no one who wasn't looking would see it, and no one was looking, because who looks hard at a smiling man with the ledgers in his hand? You bought your boy boots of tooled southern leather with bread skimmed from the pack's own mouths. And when this flood turning came and the gap in your sums had grown too wide for any spoilage or broken lock to hide, you needed a thief, a real one, named, condemned, cast out, a crime big enough and shameful enough that no man in this hall would think to read your columns too closely once it was done." She let it hang in the silence. "You needed a thief with no people, no family to cry out, no patron to demand an inquiry, a ward, an orphan." Her eyes came up just for a heartbeat and found mine on the high seat. "You chose well. I have no people in this world." And then, so quiet and so steady it went through the hall like a blade, "I chose to need none." Then she laid it out, all of it, every thread pulled at once. She called the boot boy, and the child came trembling and told the pack in his thin voice about the wrapped bundle and the copper coin and the order to leave it, unseen, beneath the ward's cot. She called the chamberlain's wife's own maid, who told what she had seen, Havard in that wing at that hour, with no honest reason to be there. She had the ledgers brought, and she read the lying sums aloud herself, column against column, the grain that came in against the grain set down, spring after spring, the widening gap laid open before the whole assembled pack, until there was no man there who could pretend not to see it. And Havard's smooth, sorrowful face came apart in front of them all. He broke. They always break in the end, the soft, careful men. Their whole strength is in never being looked at, and when the light comes on them there is nothing underneath. He wept. He fell to his knees on the cold stone in front of the entire pack, and he confessed and he begged with his hands out, exactly as she once had, in a life only she and I could feel pressing at the walls of this one. I watched her watch him beg. I watched for triumph in her face, and there was none. There was only a deep, weary, bottomless knowledge. The knowledge of exactly how little begging is worth when the powerful have already decided whether or not they will hear you. She had learned that knowledge in the coldest place there is. She would not have wished it even on him. I rose from the high seat. The hall went utterly silent. A king rising from the high seat during a judgment is a thing that happens perhaps twice in a reign, and every soul there knew it. "The ward Ussold is innocent," I said, and my voice filled the great hall to its vaults. "She was innocent before she proved it, innocent while you turned on her, all of you, innocent while this hall was ready to name her thief on a smiling man's word because she had no people to speak for her. This hall should have known it. And my voice did not shake, though something in me was shaking to its foundations. I above every soul here should have known it. Her name is restored, whole and clean, before all of you who were ready to take it from her. And any wrong done to her, or any wrong that was going to be done to her, in this hall or beyond its gates, is from this hour a wrong done to the crown itself. And the crown does not forget." And then I did the thing that made the whole pack draw breath as one. I came down from the high seat. I walked down the steps that kings do not walk down, out across the cold stone floor, through the parted silent pack, and I stopped in front of her, a kitchen ward in a mendied gray dress, standing alone in the falling gray light with the thief weeping at the edge of the crowd behind her. "You cleared your own name," I said, and I did not lower my voice because I wanted them all to hear it. "You did not need me. You told me you would not beg, and you did not beg, and you were right not to. You were more right than you know." I felt the bond blaze up in my chest then, whole and undeniable at last, the thing my whole line had waited 4 generations for, standing an arm's length away in worn gray linen and refusing to close the distance. And under the blaze, grief. The old grief I had woken with, finally finding its name. "So I will not ask you to come to me," I said lower now, for the two of us, though the hall strained to hear. "I know I have not earned it. I know, though I cannot tell you how I know, only that I feel it in my bones like a healed break before rain that I failed you once. Completely. So completely that no clearing of a name could ever be enough to mend it." My voice broke in front of my whole pack and I let it. "Let me carry it, Ussold. Let me be the one who crosses the floor to you, as far as it takes, as long as it takes." And I knelt. An alpha king on the cold stone of his own great hall before the whole of his gathered pack, knelt to a kitchen ward not to claim her, not to seize her hand, not to make her his before the crowd the way the songs would have it, only to wait, at her feet, until she chose in her own time freely, or until she did not choose at all. The hall was so silent I could hear the river. She looked down at me and her eyes were wet at last, and still, she did not reach for me. And that, I understood even then, was exactly right, and I would not have had it otherwise. She did not answer me that day. That undid me too, and I let it because I had begun, dimly, to understand the thing it had taken her a death to learn. That a woman who has been made to beg does not owe you her forgiveness on your schedule, or her love on your signal, or anything at all on any terms but her own. So I let her not answer, and I let her not answer for a long time. The weeks after the flood turning were the strangest courtship Vale Marin ever saw, if courtship is even the word, for I never once courted her the way a king courts. I sent no jewels. I sent no silks, no envoys with pretty speeches, none of the things a powerful man sends to buy a heart he has decided he is owed. I understood, without being told, that every one of those things would have been a hand held out demanding she fill it, and that she had emptied her hands into a king's demanding grasp once before and half died of it. Instead, I simply stayed. I crossed the floor to her, again and again, and I did not ask her to cross it back. I was at her side when she wanted me there, and gone the moment she did not, and I learned to read the difference in the set of her shoulders. I did not touch her, not her hand, not the edge of her sleeve, for I would not have my wanting be one more weight laid on a woman who had carried enough men's wanting to last her 2 lifetimes. I only stayed, steady and reverent, rearranging the whole shape of my reign around the freedom of one ward to refuse me, and finding, to my surprise, that a reign so arranged was a better and juster reign than the one I'd kept before. For I made new law that spring, in the wake of what had nearly happened in my hall. I made it law that no ward, no orphan, no servant, no soul without people in all of Vale Marin could be brought to judgment without a voice raised in their defense, a defender named and paid for by the crown itself, so that never again would a life turn on whether the accused had family to cry out. I made it in her name. I did not tell her I had made it, or that it was hers. She found out anyway some weeks on, because she was always reading me and reading the kingdom, and she came to me with the news of it in her face and a question she could not quite ask, and I only said, it seemed a thing that wanted doing, and let her make of it what she would. And slowly, across those weeks, I watched her let herself believe it, watched the hard-won stillness that had kept her alive begin by degrees to unclench, not into weakness, never that, but into something warmer standing right beside the strength. She began to seek me out for small things, then for larger ones. She began to let me see her tired, which is a kind of trust. One evening by the hall fire she laughed, once, unguarded, at some dry thing I said, and the sound of it went through me like the first warm day after a hard winter, and I understood that I would spend whatever remained of my life trying to earn that sound again. She came to me herself, in the end, on the night she finally crossed the floor. A soft spring night, the flood gone gentle at last, the river running quiet and low beyond the walls, the floodgates long since closed for the season. "I have to tell you something," she said, standing in the doorway of my private hall, "and when I've told you, you'll think me mad. You may send me away. I've decided I can bear it if you do, but I'll not have you crossing any more floors to me not knowing what I am." And she told me, all of it. The first life, the brooch, the turning hall, the weeping and the begging, the hands put out to a king who looked at her with a stranger's eyes and let them lead her north, the floodgates opening, the cold water and the cold road, the two small lives she had carried into the dark without even knowing until near the end that she carried them, her dying against a stone in the northern reaches, whispering to children who would never be born. And then the vow, and the waking, and the gray light, and the second life she had spent refusing, with every ounce of her being, to beg for anything ever again. I listened, and I did not once doubt her, because every word of it landed in me like a key turning in a lock I had been carrying unopened since the morning I woke weeping. My wolf keened low and long in my chest, and the grief I had woken with that first gray dawn, the salt on my face, the name I had never heard, the ache of a break I had no memory of taking, found its full name at last, and I understood, finally and completely, why I had wept for a woman I had not yet met. "I let them cast you out," I said. My voice was barely a voice. "In that other life, you begged me, you put your hands out to me, and I looked at you like you were nothing, and I let them put you through the gates into the flood. You, and I could not say it. I could not make my mouth form it. Yours," she said very gently, and she did not spare me the word because she knew I needed it more than I feared it. "They were yours, in that life. A son and a daughter, though I never knew which until it was far too late to matter. They never came to be. They never had the chance." She was quiet a moment. "I did not come back for them, Corvin. I want you to know that because it's the truth, and I've promised myself only the truth from now on. I could not have saved them. They were never begun this turn. They were never anything but a grief in a life that's gone. I came back for me, to take my own name out of the mud with my own two hands, and to never, ever put those hands out to another living soul again. And I woke grieving," I said. "That first morning, before I ever saw your face. I woke with salt on my cheeks and your name, I didn't know it was your name, coming apart in my mouth. I felt it, whatever it was. It came back through you and it woke me." She was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was not quite steady for the first time since I had known her. "I wondered," she said, "the way you looked at me at the well that first morning, the way you set a guard on the floodgates against your own law before you had any earthly reason to. I told myself it was chance. I didn't dare tell myself it was the bond, that it had refused to die when I died, that it had dragged us both back to try again. I didn't dare, because if it was true, then you would feel this thing too, and I had sworn I would never again help a man love me. A tear slipped free and ran down, and she let it, and did not wipe it away. I told myself I would let you carry it forever, that I would clear my name and take back my life and let you stand there wanting across a floor I would never cross for the rest of both our lives and call it justice. Her voice cracked clean through. But you knelt, Corvin. In front of the whole pack, you came down off the high seat and you knelt to a kitchen ward and you asked to carry it, and you never, not once, in all these weeks, asked me to close the distance. You made a law in my name and let me find it myself. You stayed, and you didn't reach for me, and you let me refuse you every single day, and you kept crossing the floor anyway. She took a step toward me, and then another, and she reached out, the first time in this whole life she had ever reached for me, and took both my hands in both of hers and held them. So I am closing it, she said. The distance. Myself. Not because you begged me, you didn't. Not because you claimed me before the pack, you didn't do that either when you could have, and that's half the reason I can do this now. I'm closing it because I choose to freely, with my name my own and my feet under me and no man's demand in my hands, which is the only way I was ever going to be able to close it at all. She lifted my hands, both of them, and pressed them flat against her own steady heart and held them there. You crossed the floor to me, my king. Every day for weeks you crossed it and asked nothing, so now I'm crossing it back, once, on my own 2 feet. Because I want to, and because wanting isn't a thing to be ashamed of anymore. Not when the man I want spent a season proving he'd never make me pay for it. I did not claim her that night, though the bond howled in me to do it, though every ancient instinct I had roared to seize the fated thing at last within my reach. I held her, only held her, her heart beating steady under our joined hands, and I let her set the pace of every closing inch of that distance and every one that came after, slow as she liked, sure as she liked. Because a woman who has once been dragged to a floodgate and put out into the cold should be, forever after, the one and only person who decides how she is held, and how close, and when. We stood like that a long time in the quiet, with the low river running soft beyond the walls and the floodgates closed against the gentle spring. She is my Luna now, and Vale Marin has never in all its long years had a truer one, not because she was chosen, not because a king came down off a high seat and lifted her up, but because she was unbegging, and the whole pack learned, from watching her stand alone in that turning hall and refuse to weep, that dignity is the one thing no injustice on this earth can take from you unless you hand it over yourself. Wards walk taller in Vale Marin now. Orphans are defended. The law I made in her name has saved more small lives than I will ever count, and every one of them is her doing as much as mine. We have 2 children, a son and a daughter, born the second spring, in a life where their mother was not put out through any gate into any cold. I will not pretend I did not weep when the midwife laid them in her arms, 2 small warm lives, come to be at last, safe and breathing in hers. Ussold looked at them a long, long time before she looked up at me, and what passed between us then had no words in it, in any tongue that has ever been spoken, and needed none. I still wake some gray mornings with the ghost of that first grief on me, the phantom salt, the ache of the old break before rain, the shadow of the man I would have been. I have stopped fearing it. I understand it now for what it is, the memory of the king who let her go, reaching back across the dark to warn the king who almost did the same. I let him grieve when he comes. He earned his grief. And I keep the vow I make him each time, which is to be, that day, a little more the king she came back to find, and a little less the one she came back to escape. And when Ussold catches me lost in it, lost in that old gray ache, she does the thing she never once did in that other life, and never had to be asked to do in this one. She crosses the floor to me herself, on her own 2 feet, unbidden, unbegging, choosing. She takes my hand, and she says my name, never pleading, never once pleading, only choosing, always only choosing. And the grief lets go of me. One more thread of it come loose and undone, and the gray morning warms, and I am here and she is here, and the gates are closed against the flood, and no one is going out into the cold. She came to me in the end, on her own feet in her own time with her name her own. But only and always because I first learned to come to her. That was the whole of it. That was the road back, the long way round through a death and a waking, and a season of crossing an empty floor with my hands held open and asking nothing. And I would walk it again, I would kneel again, before the whole assembled world, and grieve again every gray morning of my life, for the chance to have crossed that floor to her even once.